Let me just give you a little bit of a sense of where I always think it's important in coming to a conference or into any community or communion to know where you are, because knowing where you are helps enormously in how you relate to that space. So the Free State, as you know, I've been here now for 4 years and 1 month and 2 weeks and 3 days, and it's been absolutely fascinating what I have learnt about Central South Africa, because most South Africans will tell you, sort of half tongue in cheek, that they only come to the Free State when they fill up at the Ultra City between Johannesburg and Cape Town. So that joke is so lame already, you know, it doesn't really help. But it's true, most people didn't stop here, and if you were an Indian South African, you were not allowed to stop here, you know, and sleep overnight. So it's a very interesting province in the sense that as one of the Boer republics, it has a very strong Afrikaans tradition, which started off, of course, in language terms, as a very strong Dutch tradition before there was Afrikaans. And because it was relatively isolated from the rest of the country, situated here in the middle, developed only two dominant ideologies. The one was a very strong African nationalism, and the other was a very strong Afrikaner nationalism. And that made the place, in one sense, very boring. Because if you went to Durban or Cape Town or Johannesburg or these places, there were many different ideological strands. You know, where you grew up, there was a unity movement, there was Dr. Abdurrahman's African movement, there was the Communist Party, there was, you know, the Stormers. They had very many different kinds of ideologies breezing through, and so that made the place very, very interesting for purposes of politics and so on and so forth. And that blunt Afrikaner nationalism, or Basotho black and Afrikaner white, dominated the history of this province and made it, in fact, quite boring. So you don't see, like you see in many other cities, great varieties of cultural and you know, music, drama, jazz kinds of stuff. It's all very crude in these two things. So one of the things I did as a Vice Chancellor was to say the only way you can change this place is to make sure that the majority of the new students and professors coming in come in from outside of those cultures. Otherwise, you're not a university, and you're just replaying a very boring tale of history. And the rates incident in 2008 was in many ways that thing, both in racial ethnic terms, but also in language and cultural terms. It was, and in gender terms, it was that kind of replay of history. That's on the dark side. The positive part of this country, this part of the country, was that for some interesting reason, it had two of the greatest peacemakers South Africa ever had. It had M.T. Steyn, who was in fact the guy who tried to prevent the Boer War by telling Kruger in the Transvaal, and of course the British, you know, to try not to kill each other. But he didn't succeed, and so he had these concentration camps, which to this day literally mark the rural Free State. If you just drive out here, you'll see, in fact, if you get to Bethlehem, you'll see an oddity, which is a grave site. As you enter Bethlehem from this side, going towards Harry Smith, you'd find a grave site for the British dead. I stop there every time because I find it so odd. In the middle of this little town of Bethlehem, you have a grave site commemorating the British dead, and if you go to look at the little memorials, it says for King, because it wasn't a queen at the time, for King and country. That's where you are. But it also had another peacemaker, and that was the great King Moshoeshoe. And if you just forget for a minute that Lesotho is another country, which it really isn't. It's just in the colonial imagination, you know, in the mountains there. But actually, it's part of the same place, culturally, linguistically, even politically. It's the only country that South Africa moved into with force after 1994. And so on. And the great King Moshoeshoe, of course, there are wonderful stories of his role as a peacemaker. So people come here for both to observe the tragedy and trauma of the past, but also peace and hope for the future. And that is what makes the people here are not difficult. When I worked in Durban, I had 3 or 4 working stints in Durban. When people in Durban protest, or on the campuses there and so on, they first break down your door and then they ask questions. Here it's very different, okay? When people toy here, they're not serious. They're actually very loving and kind and gentle. They are the children of Steyn and Musheshwe. And if you just talk to people here, you can change their minds or they can change your mind. That's why this is not a difficult university to run. It's a very easy place to run. And I do it with an amazing team of people, many of whom are in this audience today. So we have 33,167 students as of this morning. I know most of them by name. I pray for almost all of them every day. And in my office, they come through and share their stories, black and white, gay and straight, South African and foreign national, Christian and Muslim, Jewish, and it's a wonderful, wonderful experience. I actually don't work. Most people think I work very hard. I don't. I'm just a lazy bum. I sit here and enjoy the wonderful privilege of being able to lead other people's children. That is where you are. You might want to know what happened after 2009. I got here in July 2009. Well, I have good news for you. Our workers are doing very well. They've started their own company. The company is flourishing. I went to look at their offices the other day, and I was really, really pleased with how well the workers who were abused in the rates case are doing. I've taken all of their children into a separate set of meetings to make sure that each and every one of them has an education and career plan, which we fund and support, so that they don't ever again have to face the same humiliation as their parents, but will be able to stand up and stand strong and stand against any kind of bigotry. On the side of the 4 boys, 3 of them are back working on the farms. One of them we employed in our marketing department. You want to transform a racist, put him in your marketing department, okay? And this young man has changed into an unbelievable young man that I'm very proud to be associated with. He works for his penance in some of the rural areas on his own time, serving people who are poor. That's his way of making up. He works very hard with me that every time we hear from the Human Rights Commission or somewhere else a story of racism in a local right-wing church or at one of the schools, then he says to me, Professor, kan ek asseblief saam met jou werk? Can I work with you? Because I want to tell them how much racism can do, how much harm it can do to you, and show them how to get out of that. And whenever he talks to me like that, I become very emotional, because that's light years away. You see, if you want to change somebody who does wrong, don't be like the average South African, which is you want to hit back. Try and heal back. Try and surprise the person with joy, with love, with compassion, and then you deal with it. Do it the other way around. You see, by the time Mr. Mandela went into prison, he was the prisoner. By the time he came out, the guards were the prisoner. Most people forget that. I get very irritated on every 2nd of February 1990. I get very irritated when the media say, this is the date on which de Klerk released Mandela. Bullshit! Mandela released himself. He said, you're not going to let me go here on your terms. I will come out on my terms. Okay, by the time he came out, de Klerk was in chains. Think of a different way, as the great leader taught us, in which to deal with pain and to deal with history and to deal with people who harm you. And that is a wonderful, wonderful story about this university. I'm very lucky to be here. Not a day goes by where I'm not surprised by joy, as C.S. Lewis once put it, citing Wordsworth. And the other day I was so incredibly fascinated. I'm very conservative. I have to confess this to you. I'm socially conservative. Now, unfortunately, in our country, the word conservative was always associated with right-wing idiots. But actually the word conservative can mean something good, like being socially conservative. For example, I think our president is in some ways socially conservative. You know, it's not always a good thing, but it can be. So I don't like students. If I find a student who's standing in front of me having a good old smoke, I say to him, listen, don't smoke in front of me. I'm not your playmate. And I know you won't smoke in front of your parents, so go do it somewhere else. So can you imagine the shock the other day? Outside of my office, there's this beautiful white girl and this handsome black guy, and they were exploring each other's tonsils. And and you know, the social conservative in me, I can see some of you saying, "Jy fok my kind gaan potch too," but you know, the social conservative in me wanted to go to them and say, listen, you two, go and discover each other somewhere else. And then I remembered how when I got here, they couldn't even tolerate looking at each other. And so this is a wonderful story. It's an incomplete story. You know, when an institution like ours is 109 years old today, 109 years old, you must understand, you can't toy an institution into change. You have to work hard at it. You have to have strategies. You've got to be patient. So we still have a long way to go. Nobody's going to tell me this place changed in 4 years. It's too short a time. But at least you can see, yeah, the signs of what South Africa can be. And I think the conference and the way in which Eugene and Advocate Mali and others have approached this is really about how South Africa can be if we begin to look not just for pathology, but for the kinds of things that work. And so to all of you who didn't know where you were until you got here, welcome. You'll see the trauma once again. If you come off the N1 year, I must stop trying to be a historian, you know? But if you come off the N1 year, did you see the first building that meets you on the left-hand side? If you don't understand Afrikaans, this is what it says. Just imagine you come out of 4 hours of driving, right? From Johannesburg or wherever you came from. And you turn in there, and the first thing that introduces you to Bloemfontein is a building with a big sign that says, Dam van Trane, Bron van Herinnering. Oh my God, why are you depressing people? They're just, you know, dam of tears, source of memories. Holy crap, something horrible must have happened here, that's true. But that's when you get in. But when you go further, you also see great stories, and hear great stories of hope. Have a wonderful time at our university in Bloemfontein and in the Free State Province, and come back over and over again. Thank you.